Hello. In this video, I'll show you two methods for opening VMDK files and copying files from VMDK images to your computer. The first method involves opening a VMDK virtual disk in a virtual machine running on a hypervisor, such as VMware ESXi or VMware Workstation. You can boot the VM from a bootable ISO media, such as Ubuntu installation media. This approach can be used if there's no guest operating system installed in the VMDK image. Let's look at how to use this method on ESXi in VMware host client. The same principle applies if using vSphere client. First, go to Virtual Machines and select the VM with the virtual disk contents that you want to open and with the guest operating system that doesn't work. Click Edit to edit the VM settings. In this example, I will boot from a live ISO image to access this VM's virtual disk. Optionally, you can attach an additional VMDK file whose contents you want to access before booting the VM from live media. Ensure that the virtual disk controller is compatible with the operating system on the bootable media. I use a SATA controller in this example. Expand the CD/DVD drive settings and select a bootable ISO image. I select the Ubuntu 24 installation media. I had already uploaded this ISO file to the ESXi data store. Make sure that the checkboxes to connect the CD/DVD drive and connect this device at power on are selected. Click Save to save the virtual machine settings, power on the virtual machine, and open virtual BIOS settings. Select the virtual DVD drive as the first boot device. Press F2 to enter the BIOS setup for the VM. Go to the Boot tab and change the boot order by putting the CD-ROM drive in the first place. Press plus and minus to edit the boot order and move the device up or down. Exit saving changes. Select Yes to save changes and hit Enter. Open the VM console to view the virtual monitor and manage the VM with the guest operating system. I use VMware Remote Console installed on my computer. You can also use the built-in web interface in VMware Host Client or vSphere Client. Select Try Ubuntu or Install Ubuntu and press Enter. Choose the interface language and go to the next steps. Select the needed options and click Next. Select your keyboard layout. Select Internet connection options. You can skip the update. Select Try Ubuntu and click Next. I will use this environment only to access files stored on the VMDK virtual disk for one time. Click Close. Open the console or terminal in Linux. Let's get root privileges. List available hard disk devices in the virtual machine. There are 3 partitions on my virtual disk, dev SDA1, dev SDA2, and dev SDA3. Make directories to be used as mount points for each partition. That is, make dir/mnt/win-disk1, then make dir/mnt/win-disk2, and then with disk 3. Mount the partitions of the virtual disk to the appropriate directories. Then, list the files and directories of the mounted partitions, ls-al/mnt/win-disk1, and then with disk 2 and disk 3. I can see the files on all 3 partitions of the attached virtual disk. This means that I can copy the needed files. The partition mounted to Win Disk 2 is the partition used as Disk C in Windows. Now you can attach a USB hard disk drive or HDD to the USB port of your ESXi host and connect this HDD to the virtual machine using the USB pass-through feature. This way you can copy the needed files stored on the VMDK file used as a virtual disk by the virtual machine. Another way is to use an SMB share and copy the contents of the virtual disk, that is, the VMDK file, to another location via the network. In this example, I'll cover copying data to an SMB share. The share has been created on the host. With IP address ending in 209, the share name is the IP address /share01, and user 11 has write permissions for this share. Don't forget that Linux, unlike Windows, uses the / when connecting to a share. Let's mount the SMB share on Linux loaded from the live DVD. First, create a directory to be used as the mount point with make dir/mnt/smb-share. Then, mount the SMB share to this directory using mount-tsifs-o user equals user 11 / the IP address /share/mnt/smb-share. Enter the password of the user. Now, your Linux system is connected to the SMB share, and you can copy the contents stored inside the VMDK file to the SMB share over the network. Let's go to the directory to which the SMB share is mounted and copy the boot manager file from the mounted partition of the virtual disk that is the VMDK file on the ESXi data store to the current directory that is the SMB share. cd/mount/SMB share. cp/mount win disk to boot manager. Don't forget to define the destination directory. I use the .character to use the current directory as the destination directory. Then, make sure that the necessary files have been copied and check the contents of your SMB share. As you can see, the boot manager file used in this example has been copied successfully. This was the first method of copying the contents of a VMDK file to another location when the operating system installed on VM cannot boot. The same logic applies to VMware Player or VMware Workstation. Before I proceed, let me quickly tell you about NAKIVO Backup and Replication and how it can help you protect your VMware VMs. NAKIVO Backup and Replication is a comprehensive data protection solution that you can use to protect all your workloads from a single pane of glass. Whether it's VMware, Proxmox, Hyper-V, physical servers, file shares, or Microsoft 365, backups can be protected against cyber threats like ransomware with immutability and encryption. Once a backup is created, you have multiple instant recovery options. You can learn more about the solution by going to www.nakivo.com. Now, let's look at the second method, which involves mounting a VMDK file as a virtual disk to a healthy virtual machine in ESXi and VMware Workstation. The first example of using this method will be opening a VMDK virtual disk of one VM by using another VM on the ESXi host. Power off the VM using the virtual disk from which you want to extract files. Find this virtual disk in the ESXi data store. You can click the VM and expand the virtual disk options. Click the link to the data store. Open the data store browser. Locate the needed virtual disk on the data store and click Copy. Select the destination for a copy of the virtual disk and click Copy. Then, you can close the data store browser. The virtual disk was copied successfully. You can also check the destination directory in the data store browser. The alternative method to check the content of the directory is using PuTTY, the SSH client. Virtual disks of the ESXi-format consist of two files, a VMDK descriptor file and a virtual disk data file in the format of flat.vmdk. A data store browser displays only one file, even if you have copies of both virtual disk files. You can see all existing files in the SSH client. Let's check the contents of the corresponding directories. The virtual disk was copied successfully. Both the VMDK and flat.vmdk files are present. Now, you need to attach the VMDK virtual disk to another healthy VM whose operating system is working properly. In this example, a VM running Windows Server 2022 on the same ESXi host is used. The VM name is WinServer 2022. Select the functioning VM and click Edit Settings to attach the additional virtual disk that you need to open. Click Add Hard Disk and click Existing Hard Disk. Select the virtual disk that was recently copied and click Select. Click Save to save the virtual machine settings. Power on the VM, and open the VMware VM console to manage the running VM and the guest operating system. Open the Computer Management window. Go to Disk Management and find your disk attached. Ensure that the disk is online and assign a disk letter if needed. Note that the guest operating system must support the file system used on the attached disk. In this example, the disk is attached and a disk letter is assigned. Right-click the attached disk and hit Open. Now you have full read/write access to the virtual disk. Copy the needed files from the attached virtual disk to a custom location. You can also delete unnecessary data on the attached virtual disk. For example, if the disk is full and there are related issues. This attached virtual disk does not have any snapshots. Be careful when attaching a virtual disk if there are related snapshots. Next, I will explain how to open virtual disks of the ESXi format in VMware Workstation. This method can be used when there is no free disk space on the ESXi data store to copy a virtual disk, for example. First, you need to copy the files of the virtual disk to the local machine where VMware Workstation is installed. Go to the data store and locate the directory where the virtual disk is stored. Select the appropriate data store and open the data store browser. Go to the directory where the virtual disk is stored. Select the virtual disk and click Download. Select the directory to save the virtual disk descriptor and data files. Note that the current size of the thin provisioned virtual disk on the VMFS data store is about 2 GB, while the maximum size is 6 GB. We must prepare 6 GB on the local machine to download this virtual disk. This is the maximum provision size for this disk. This is because thin provisioning is a VMFS feature. Wait until the download is complete. I've downloaded the needed virtual disk files. Alternatively, you can download files from ESXi using an SFTP/SCP client, such as WinSCP in Windows. Locate the source directory on ESXi in the right panel and the local destination directory in the left panel. Then copy the needed files. Once the virtual disk files have been copied, open VMware Workstation. I have a healthy Windows 10 virtual machine that I will use to open the virtual disk copied from the ESXi host. Open the VM and click Edit Virtual Machine Settings. Click Add and select Hard Disk. Click Next at each step of the wizard to continue. Select a virtual disk controller that is compatible with your VM and guest operating system. I'm using a SATA controller. Select Use an existing virtual disk. Click Browse and select the VMDK file copied from the ESXi data store. Note that you must select the virtual disk descriptor VMDK file, not the flat.vmdk file, which is virtual disk raw data. VMware Workstation suggests updating the virtual disk format. Let's ignore this message and keep the existing format. Click OK to save the VM settings. Power on the virtual machine in VMware Workstation. Note that if you see the error that the virtual disk is not compatible with this virtual machine, edit the virtual disk descriptor file. This is the VMDK file for a virtual disk of the ESXi format. Open your VMDK file in a text editor and edit the number in the ddb.virtual.hw version string. For example, change 13 to 12. Open the Computer Management window. Right-click the My Computer icon and click Manage in the context menu. Ensure that the needed partitions on the attached virtual disk have drive letters. Then open the needed volume to manage files. Now I have full access to the content of the virtual disk of the ESXi format in VMware Workstation. I can copy files in both directions and edit and delete files on the virtual disk. This workflow works fine in my case. You can use drag and drop to copy files to and from the host machine. Let's look at how to extract data from a VMDK file without powering on a VM. The first method involves using VMware Workstation installed on Linux or Windows. So let's open a VMDK file with this method in Linux. Open VMware Workstation. VMware Workstation provides a nice feature that allows you to mount VMDK files to your host operating system. Click File, then Mount Virtual Disks. Enter the password of your Linux user. Click Mount Virtual Disk. Enter the path to the virtual disk file, or click Browse and select the VMDK file. In this example, my virtual disk has 2 snapshots. Open the latest Delta file in a chain to open the latest version of the VM disk. Be careful because writing changes to the parent disk can corrupt data in the snapshot chain. Let's select the Delta VMDK file corresponding to the latest snapshot to open the virtual disk. Dependencies will be resolved automatically by VMware Workstation when selecting a differencing virtual disk created when taking a snapshot. Specify the target directory where to mount the virtual disk image. I use /mnt/vmdk in this example. Ensure that this directory exists and there are enough permissions for the user. Let's create this directory before selecting this directory to mount the virtual disk image. Open the Linux command line console. We are using the console as root now. Create a directory with make_dir/mnt/vmdk/. Set permissions for your user and group with change owner command using chown-r user 1:group 1/mnt/vmdk/ and change mode using chmod-r 0775/mnt/vmdk/. The safest way to open VMDK files is enabling the read-only mode, especially when there are snapshots and Delta disks. If you're not opening the VMDK file corresponding to the latest VM state, for example, if you're selecting a parent VMDK from an earlier snapshot, make sure to select read-only mode. This prevents corruption and ensures the integrity of your virtual disk. Once I have created the directory, I can click Mount. You can view virtual disk contents and copy files from the virtual disk by opening the appropriate VMDK mount directory. After creating each snapshot, I created the appropriate text file on the virtual disk. As you can see, I have opened the latest state of the virtual disk after creating 2 snapshots. After you finish working with files on the mounted virtual disk, don't forget to unmount the virtual disk. Click File, then Mount Virtual Disk in VMware Workstation. Enter the password when prompted. Select the mounted virtual disk and click Unmount Disk. Then you can close this window. Let's see what will happen if I open the parent virtual disk that was created before taking snapshots. I am mounting the parent virtual disk of the same Windows virtual machine. Don't forget to enable the read-only mode when mounting a parent virtual disk. Otherwise, all data in Delta disks can be corrupted if any changes are made to the parent virtual disk. When I view the contents of this mounted disk, I don't see the text files I created after taking snapshots. That's because those files exist only in the snapshot Delta disks, not in the original base disk. This confirms that I've opened the virtual disk in an earlier state, before the changes made in the snapshots. Unmount the virtual disk when you're done working with this disk. If you prefer using the console interface, you can mount VMDK disk images on the Linux host in the console with the command VMware-mount/media/user. 1vms/vm_name/vm_disk_name.vmdk/mnt/vmdk, where vm_name is the name of the virtual machine, and vm_disk_name is the name of the virtual disk. You can use the -R key in the command line to mount a disk in read-only mode. I can view the content of the mounted virtual disk. I can list all mounted VMDK virtual disks. Before finishing working with mounted VMDK virtual disks, unmount all virtual disks with VMware -mount-x. Don't forget that root permissions are required. Similarly, you can mount Delta disks in the command line. If VMware Workstation is installed on Windows, you can similarly mount a VMDK virtual disk to a virtual disk drive. Open VMware Workstation and click File, then Map Virtual Disk. Click Map and select a VMDK file to open. Click Browse to select the file. You can open the parent virtual disk and Delta disks that were created after taking snapshots. It is recommended that you mount a virtual disk in read-only mode to avoid virtual disk corruption if data is written. You can select a drive letter. Click OK to proceed. The mounted virtual disk is opened as a virtual drive in Windows Explorer. As I've mounted the latest Delta disk, I'll change the files that I created after making 2 snapshots. My test files are present. It means that I've opened the latest Delta disk successfully to get the latest virtual disk state. When you finish working with the mounted virtual disk, disconnect the virtual disk to unmount this virtual disk. You may see an error. Just try once again in a few seconds. There is one more way to mount a virtual disk in the graphical user interface in Windows if VMware Workstation is installed. When VMware Workstation is installed, some options are added to the context menu in Windows Explorer. Let's open a virtual disk of the ESXi format in this example. I will mount this virtual disk to a virtual disk drive. Right-click the VMDK file, which is a virtual disk descriptor file in this case, and click Map Virtual Disk or Map Virtual Disk as Z. I'll use the second option and mount a virtual disk safely in read-only mode to drive Z. Now, I can see the mounted virtual disk as a drive in Windows Explorer. You can open this disk and copy the needed files from this virtual disk to any available locations on your host Windows system. To unmount the virtual disk, right-click the virtual disk drive and click Disconnect Virtual Disk. If VMware Workstation is not installed on your computer, you can extract files from VMDK virtual disks using the 7-zip archiver. The first way to open a VMDK file in 7-zip is to open 7-zip and then click File and Open. If you have 7-zip installed in Windows, some entries are added to the context menu in Windows Explorer. Right-click the VMDK file, and in the context menu, click 7-zip, then Open Archive. You can browse files in the archiver and extract the needed files to any location on your computer. Let's check whether I can open Delta disks for VMs that have snapshots. I'm trying to open the latest VMDK Delta disk in 7-zip. We can see the name of the image, but the virtual disk image cannot be opened in 7-zip when opening a Delta disk. If you need to open Delta disks, consider using VMware Workstation rather than 7-zip. 7-zip is a multi-platform archiver, and you can use 7-zip in Linux to open virtual disks as well. Install 7-zip on Linux using the command line with root privileges. apt-get install p7zip-full. Let's go to the directory with virtual machines and virtual disks. List contents of the VMDK file with 7-zip, 7zlvm_name.vmdk. The list of all files stored on the virtual disk is displayed in the console. Let's find the files that contain boot. In their names. For instance, 7zl/media/user1/data/vm/winxp-test/winxp-test.vmdk pipe grep boot left square bracket dot right square bracket. Here user1 is the name of my Linux user, L is list. Let's extract the boot.ini file from the VMDK image using 7ze/media/user1/data/vm/winxp-test.vmdkboot.ini. The E character means extract. The file was extracted successfully. You can extract other files and directories from the VMDK file in the same way. Let's look at other methods to mount VMDK files in Linux. One of the methods is using /devloop. Loop devices are pseudo devices in Linux. which make files accessible as block devices and can be used to mount disk images that contain file systems. This method is good for mounting flat VMDK files, even without a virtual disk descriptor. Open the console and go to the directory where virtual machines and virtual disks are stored. Use the command shown to check the number of existing loop devices on your Linux system. The root privileges are required. In my case, devices with numbers 1 to 14 already exist. Thus, let's create the loop device number 30. This number is free. I will associate this device with the flat.vmdk file. Use the command shown on the screen. The root privileges are required. Set the offset as shown. Here 3, 2, 2, 5, 6 is the offset that is 63 by 512 for a disk formatted in Windows XP, Windows Server 2003 and older Windows versions. 63 is the number of the first sector of the partition, and 512 bytes is the sector size. For Windows 7, Windows Server 2008, and newer Windows versions, try the offset 105. 9061 76. You can retrieve information about the sector size and the first sector used for the boot start with the fdes command. As an alternative, for virtual disks that contain multiple partitions, you can use parted to determine the start and the end of each partition. In the parted console, enter the following commands to check the partition parameters, including partition start, unit, b means bytes, print. Then, you can quit fdisk. Create a directory to be used as the mount point for the VMDK image with make directory as shown. Ensure that enough permissions are set to this directory for your user. Mount the loopback device associated with the VMDK image to the created directory. List the content of the mounted image. We can see files and directories on the mounted virtual disk. You can copy files and directories to your Linux machine. After finishing working with the content of the virtual disk, unmount the VMDK image and disconnect the loop device. Another method to mount VMDK virtual disk images in the Linux command line is using kpartx. kpartx is a tool that can mount partitions within image files to the directories of your real Linux file system. This tool can be used to set up device mappings for partitions of block devices. This method also works for mounting flat.vmdk images used on ESXi servers. Let's see how to mount the flat.vmdk file used in the previous example. Install kpartx. Add the partition mapping for the VMDK image in the verbose operating mode. Mount a partition to the /mount VMDK image directory that was prepared before. Here loop 30 is the number of the loop device, and P1 is the number of the partition inside the image, that is, the first partition on the disk image. The root privileges are required. List the content of the virtual disk partition you have mounted. I can see the files and directories on the mapped virtual disk. I can copy the files. When you have finished operations with the files of the VMDK image, unmount the VMDK virtual disk image. This was all about opening VMDK virtual disks in Windows and Linux. Thank you for watching. If you found this video helpful, click the like button and subscribe to our YouTube channel to catch new uploads. Don't forget to protect your data wherever it resides, whether in virtual environments, in the cloud, or on physical servers. NAKIVO Backup and Replication is a universal backup solution that delivers flexible deployment on different platforms, fast and efficient backups, and instant recoveries for the shortest recovery objectives. You can easily try the solution in your own environment by downloading the free trial and get access to all the advanced backup, disaster recovery, and ransomware protection features for 15 days.